Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Arctic Wire Rope and Supply, an Alaskan company providing quality lifting and rigging products since 1983, manufacturing custom wire ropes, chains, and nylon slings here in Anchorage, on the web at arcticwirerope.com.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, arh.noaa.gov. You can get any updates to our forecast there, or check out any watches, warnings, advisories that we may have out at the time. Our weather info line is 1-800-472-0391. You can get forecast updates there as well. And you can follow us both on Twitter and on Facebook. Starting us off, we'll take a look at our watches and warnings for the area. In the southeast near Ketchikan, in the southern inner channels, we do have a winter weather advisory out. That is from 9 p.m. through 5 a.m. expecting some snow there, and 5 a.m. on Tuesday. It is primarily north of Ketchikan, however, but you can check our website and get updates to that forecast. And it's kind of hard to see here, but right there by Valdez, we have an area where we have a warning out, and that is a blizzard warning for Thompson Pass. That is in effect from 9 p.m. tonight till 4 p.m. tomorrow. A lot of stronger winds going to bring up some of that snow that's on the ground there, going to make conditions really difficult to see and really difficult to drive. And again, check our website for more information on those. Taking a look at our next impact is going to be a low pressure system moving up from the south in the North Pacific there. You can start to see that circulation really take hold and some of the leading edge of the clouds making their way closer to the western Aleutian Islands. As we watch this loop once again, really focus down here, and we can see the circulation developing, our low pressure really starting to take shape and bring some of that warmer air from the south, going to bring in some warmer conditions, some rain mixed with snow to places along the Aleutians as that system gets closer. And we can see out over the Bering Sea now, the darker colored clouds there, a lot of low cloud cover over the Bering Sea, some lower stratus there, and some areas of fog underneath that. As we look out over the main part of Alaska, we have another low pressure system making its way towards the southeast, moving pretty quickly, bringing a push of warm air with that as well, bringing in some rain to the southern parts of the Panhandle. And as that system moves off, it's going to bring in some colder air around on the other side. It's going to transition that rain over to snow as the system moves out into Canada. As we watch this loop again, we can see those lower clouds making their way into parts of the Gulf. Some lower stratus out there as well, pulling off the land, but out over a lot of the southeastern part of mainland Alaska. Not a whole lot of cloud cover there, but we can see some cloud cover along the northwestern part of the state. As we look at our forecast for the rest of today, we can see underneath those clouds, we are seeing some areas of snow extending from northern parts of the YK Delta up the western coast of the state and along the Arctic coast there, with some areas of blowing snow with some of the stronger winds up along the coastline. Down into parts of the main interior and then down through the south central, not seeing a whole lot of precipitation, but some isolated areas of snow around the Kachemak Bay area, extending down into places around Kodiak Island. And then way off to the east, we can see the rain ahead of this system moving in. That's bringing some rain to the Ketchikan area and places around southern Panhandle there. As we look out over to the west, high pressure is dominating the Bering Sea, keeping the lower stratus under there, but not a whole lot of precipitation right now, just some areas of fog, isolated areas of snow showers for parts of the Alaska Peninsula. And then as we move into the tonight period, we can see the leading edge of that front bringing in some rain with the stronger winds, really tight pressure gradient around the system, so we are expecting some stronger winds with that. And then out over the Aleutian Islands, some isolated rain and snow showers, turning to all snow as we get over to the eastern Aleutian Islands, and high pressure with some areas of fog throughout the central Bering Sea. Not a whole lot over the Bristol Bay area, that high pressure keeping the precipitation further to the north. Parts of the northern YK Delta, isolated snow showers all up along the coastline, mixing with fog as we get along the Arctic coast, and areas of blowing snow up there as well with the stronger winds. High pressure over mainland Alaska, keeping some patchy areas of fog extending down into the south central. Not a whole lot of precipitation though, just some isolated snow showers around Kodiak Island. but we are going to have those blowing snow conditions through Thompson Pass. That again is in effect from 9 p.m. tonight through 4 p.m. on Tuesday. And as we get to the southeast part of the state, snow in the northern parts mixing with rain as we get further to the south. Then as we move into Tuesday, that snow and rain mix is going to push off further to the south, leaving the northern parts void of precipitation. And then we have our fog still remaining through much of the morning hours on Tuesday throughout the south central. And we are still going to have those blowing snow conditions through Thompson Pass. As we move up into the interior, now that snow spreading out through much of the interior, mixing with fog through many locations, including up along the coastline. Still going to see those blowing snow conditions up there. Then as we move along the west coast, that snow and fog mix going all the way down to northern parts of the YK Delta, where we'll once again see a break from that until we get down into the Aleutian Islands. Our frontal system, we're getting really close now to the Aleutians, bringing in a rain and snow mixed with fog from the western Aleutian Islands all the way through Dutch Harbor area, with some warmer air coming behind that, transitioning that precip over to rain. And as we look into Wednesday, this frontal system moves up through the Bering, bringing that rain-snow mix into the central Bering out over the western Aleutian Islands, but transitioning to rain throughout much of the central and eastern Aleutian Islands. Still some fog in there with that, though. As we move off further to the east, seeing that rain-snow mix throughout Kodiak Island, transitioning to snow throughout much of the Bristol Bay and YK Delta areas. A little bit lighter as we get further to the north, with just some isolated snow showers extending up to the Point Hope area. And then out across the northern parts of the interior to the upper Yukon Valley and the eastern Arctic coastline. Much of the southern interior, not going to see a whole lot of precip, and that also includes the south central. However, in the southern parts of the Kenai Peninsula, we are going to see some snow making its way up there. And then some isolated areas of snow showers throughout the southeast, to include areas around Yakutat and the central parts of the Panhandle. Taking us into our temperatures for this afternoon. One of the highs in the state, 38 degrees down there at Ketchikan. Other areas in the Panhandle into the mid-30s. As we move further off to the west, some colder temperatures in the teens along the Gulf coastline, dropping down below zero as we get further inland in the south central. -9 for Talkeetna, -1 for Golconda. Colder as we get into the interior, around -30 for many locations. One of the coldest in the state, -42 at Arctic Village. Not quite that bad, but still pretty cold, -41 for Bettles. A little bit warmer actually as we get along the Arctic coastline, right around the zero mark there, with 1 at Barrow. And then as we move along the west coast of the state, we get into the Kotzebue Sound area, warmer out to the west, 10 at Point Hope, getting colder as we move further inland, -4 at Kotzebue, then down to -18 as we get by Ambler. Down in the Norton Sound area in the teens for most locations, Nome at 16 degrees. That takes us down into the YK Delta, where we're going to see temperatures dropping into the single digits, 6 degrees at Bethel, getting colder as we get further off to the east, -8 at Aniak and -8 at Sparevon as well. And then as we get to the Hooper Bay area, a little bit warmer there, 23 degrees. Taking us down to the Bristol Bay area, 10 degrees for Dillingham, 0 for Iliamna and King Salmon. And as we move into the Aleutian Islands, getting up into the 30s, 38 the other high there at Shemya this afternoon. And then as we move towards the St. Paul area, 28 degrees this afternoon for them. Taking us into our lows for tonight, we are going to see temperatures down in the 30s throughout the Aleutian Islands, and then in the southwest part of the state, dropping down into the negatives, -5 for the King Salmon area, -7 for Iliamna, single digits for many places in the YK Delta, a little bit colder Aniak, -3 expected low there. Then up along the Seward Peninsula in the single digits, Nome 8 degrees, colder as we get into the Kotzebue Sound, -2 expected low for Kotzebue tonight. Then dropping down below zero for the Arctic coastline, a little bit colder as we get further off to the east, -10 expected low for Barter Island, dropping down to the -30s for much of the interior, with -38 for Fort Yukon, and then a little bit warmer but still below zero as we get into the south central lows tonight, -28 expected low for Glen Allen, -10 for Anchorage and for Talkeetna, with -13 for Homer. As we get into the southeast part of the state, dropping down into the 20s for most locations, a little bit colder to the north, 14 for Haines, and then only down into the 30s for many places in the south. Looking at our highs for tomorrow, staying in the 30s in the south and remaining in the teens for up north. Not a whole lot of change expected for the highs from the overnight temperatures. As we move into the south central, into the single digits for a lot of locations. Still pretty cold in Glen Allen area, minus 15 there, and into the teens along the Gulf coastline, with Seward and Cordova both getting up to as high as 13 degrees tomorrow. Kodiak getting up to 25 for a high. Then in the interior part of the state, still remaining below zero, but going to get up into the minus teens there, with Fairbanks getting up to minus 18 for tomorrow, and minus 22 for Arctic Village, Fort Yukon, and Eagle. And then up along the Arctic coastline, going to be right around zero for highs tomorrow, with Dead Horse staying around minus 2 for that high. Along the west coast of the state, into the teens for most locations. Warmer as we get further off to the west, taking us down to the YK Delta, into the teens there as well, with Bethel getting up to 17 degrees. Warmer at Nunavut Island, 28 degrees expected high there. Down in the Bristol Bay area, Dillingham up to as high as 11 degrees. And then into the 30s, and the Aleutian Islands getting warmer as we get further out to the west. 41 degrees expected high for Shemya tomorrow. And St. Paul getting up to 32 degrees tomorrow. Switching gears a little, we'll take a look at our aviation forecast. With that stratus, we are seeing some widespread MVFR conditions throughout much of the Bering Sea. And tomorrow, as that front approaches, going to see those IFR conditions making their way over the Aleutian Islands. With our snow along the west coast, we are expected to see some IFR conditions out there. And similarly, up along the Arctic coast, with the snow, fog, and blowing snow, IFR conditions all along the Arctic coastline, with some isolated areas of MVFR conditions with the snow showers that we're seeing moving by Kodiak Island tomorrow. But much of the south central and panhandle area is going to be void of the precipitation, so expecting to see VFR conditions there. Taking a look at our passes, Anaktuvuk should be VFR. Adigan Pass should also be VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill both expected to be VFR tomorrow. Rainy Pass should also be VFR throughout the day. Windy Pass, VFR conditions expected. Isabel Pass, VFR conditions as well. Mentasta, VFR, as well as Tanita Pass. Portage also going to be VFR tomorrow. Chilkoot and White expected to be VFR as well. Taking a look at our freezing levels, we have some warmer air out ahead of that frontal system moving up towards the southeast right now. And then our freezing line is going right along the Gulf side of the Panhandle, extending out into the Gulf, going down south of Kodiak Island, across the Alaska Peninsula, then out into the Bering Sea and off to the west. We are seeing some warmer air ahead of that frontal system coming in from the North Pacific as well, bringing in those warmer temps closer towards the central Aleutian Islands. And that takes us to our icing chart, where we have along the west coast of the state a little bit more intense icing there between 3,000 and 7,000 feet. Then down along the central Aleutian Islands above 8,000 feet there, pretty light. And then over the southern parts of the Panhandle between 5,000 and 10,000 feet, expecting some icing there. As we take a look at our jet stream, one of the streaks of the jet moving in from the northwest, we have 70 knots there going through mainland Alaska. The rest of the jet stays to our south, with a little exception. Crossing over the Aleutian Islands, we have the jet coming in at 150, dropping down to 105 as it makes it over the eastern Aleutian Islands, and then exiting off to the east, just to the south of the Panhandle, getting up to as high as 120 knots there. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, our main low pressure system with some stronger winds out of the south there, as high as 60 knots, dropping off pretty quickly as we get out into the Bering. 40 knots over the eastern Aleutian Islands, dropping down to 20 in the Bering Sea, and then flow over mainland Alaska, primarily out of a northwesterly direction. Pretty high along the Arctic coast, 35 knots there, dropping out to 25 for much of the mainland, a little bit stronger off to the west as well, up to as high as 35 knots there. And then coming in over the southeast part of the state out of a southwesterly direction. Strongest winds to the south, 40 knots, and then getting 50 as we get out of the Panhandle area. Taking us down to 3,000 feet, pretty similar flow pattern. Primary flow over mainland Alaska out of a northwesterly direction, as high as 40 knots just off the coastline of the Arctic coast, dropping down to 20 out over the northern parts of the state, up to as high as 30 through the core of mainland Alaska. And as we get over the Panhandle area out of a southwesterly direction, 25 knots there. taking us out to the west with our main low pressure system up to as high as 70 knots around that low out of that southerly direction, becoming more easterly as we get over the islands, up to as high as 60 knots over the western Aleutian Islands, 40 knots over the central, and 25 knots over the eastern Aleutian Islands. Seeing that stronger flow interacting with the terrain, expecting to see some turbulence and light chop with that. And as that low moves throughout, we do have in our turbulence chart below 6,000 feet extending from the western Aleutian Islands out towards the eastern. And as time goes on throughout the day tomorrow, this is going to extend further to the east, and with the potential for some isolated severe areas as we get out into the evening hours. So keep that in mind if you're flying out in the Aleutian Islands tomorrow. Up along the northeastern part of the state, below 4,000 feet in the Barter Island, Dead Horse areas there, below 5,000 feet from the Seward Peninsula out to the east through the interior, and then from the eastern parts of the Prince William Sound extending through the northern parts of the Panhandle, some light turbulence, occasional moderate there below 6,000 feet. And if you stay with us, we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ed Cornfield. On behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to another edition of Hangar Flying. My guest this evening is Fred Keller. Fred has been on the show before and has built several composite home-built airplanes. Welcome to Hangar Flying, Fred.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So let's start out by talking a little bit about your history building airplanes. How did you get started, and what led you into that field?
Well, actually, I started out at a very young age because my dad was a flying farmer, and my first ride was in a Aeronix Champ back in 1945. I was 3 years old at that time, but had that interest. I built model airplanes as a kid, and then eventually when I moved to Alaska, I decided to get my pilot's license, and soon after that I started building airplanes, and that's been my adult hobby for practically my entire adult life, is building home builds. And
But these are kind of special home builds. They're all composites? Or?
they're all composites, yeah. I started out with a KR-1, which was a wood and foam type composite construction, and then went on to the Very Easy, and then a Defiant, and then decided to try my own, and that was the Prospector, which I built 2 of those.
And you were actually, you were shown on the pictures of some magazines, your airplanes were anyway, for...
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of being on several magazines.
And we have a picture coming up on the screen here. Maybe describe that.
Well, that's back at Oshkosh in Sport Aviation, which is our EAA magazine, club magazine. And that was the year I won Grand Champion with that Very Easy. I've had the pleasure of winning Grand Champion twice, and to the best of my knowledge, still the only person to win it with 2 different aircraft.
Wow. And now you built this one. How long did it take to build that?
I generally anywhere from 18 months to 22 months on each one of the airplanes.
And how many hours a week or a month would you put into this?
Oh goodness, as many as I could cram in. It was kind of like a steady job after getting off my regular 8-hour day job and weekends.
I've seen the industry grow into, years ago people would start home builds and they may not, they wouldn't get them finished, and you'd always be able to buy one in the paper that was half done or 30%. Yeah. Now it seems that more and more people are finishing. What do you attribute that to?
I think a lot of it is that there's less plans built airplanes being offered today as compared to back when I was building, and a lot more kits, and some of these kits are very, very well manufactured, and they go together quite well. Although I've seen some of those take many, many more years than what it used to take me to scratch build an airplane.
Right. Plus, I think the factories, the designers are giving a lot more support. People can go to classes and things like that. So.
Right. I always liked the scratch built because there was no question in my mind who had to make the next part, and that was the fun part of it.
Now you brought a little model in to tell us a little bit about that.
This is the Prospector. After building The KR-1, the Very Easy, and the Defiant, especially Defiant, and working with Burt Rutan so closely on it, I thought I had enough background to maybe try one on my own. So I sat down at the drawing board and started designing a plane. Interestingly, it started out as a high wing airplane. That's what I really wanted, but I really didn't think a low wing would do well in Alaska, so but a high wing compromised because it would require struts or a big spar in and around your head. So one night I was kind of doodling around on the drafting board, and if I can't put it on top and I can't put it on the bottom, I'll put the wing in the middle. So it came out as a mid-wing aircraft, two-place side by side, lots of cargo area, and quite an efficient plane. It was a nice cross between a Super Cub and a Cessna 180. It would do some things that neither one of those planes would do, and yet it was very close to each one of those planes.
How many of these are still flying today?
This is the only one that's still flying, and it's in Camas, Washington. A good friend of mine that was one of my instructors that in the past built that, or has the airplane. He bought it from me.
We have about a minute left. Let me put up another picture here, and we can talk about this one. Just give us a little, just a short brief about what that is.
Okay, that was my first airplane. That was a KR-1, which had a 17-foot wingspan, powered by a Volkswagen engine. You could take the wings off and set it in the back of a pickup truck. And Merrill Field used to tease me because they'd say, we don't know if it's an airplane or a seagull, so I started calling it a seagull. But quite a nice little airplane.
And here's another one that just briefly, we have a real short time, but maybe you
Okay,
can tell us.
that's a Defiant. Burt Rutan offered me the chance to build the second prototype of the Defiant if I would document it and take pictures of it and so forth. So that's what I did, and this was the results.
And I'm going to stop you there, but next time we're going to have you back on here in the next session, and we'll talk a little about that and go on from there. And Fred, thanks very much for joining us on Hangar Flying. And folks out there, have a good evening and fly safe.
Welcome back. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. Out over the Chukchi Sea, we did have some flash freezing over the last couple days, so that's all ice filled now. You will notice that we have an area of open ice to the northern side of St. Lawrence Island extending out towards Nome. That is expected to fill in pretty rapidly over the next couple days with the colder air and the ice surrounding that whole zone there. Down by Nunavik Island, we are expecting that ice to extend further off to the southwest as over the next couple days with some colder temps there as well. Ice over the Bristol Bay area, not expecting to extend too far to the south, maybe off to the west with those warmer temperatures that we have coming in from the south, so keep an eye on that. Then out in the Cook Inlet area, we do have some ice extending down around the Kenai area now, so keep an eye out for that as well. Going to expect some shifts with the tidal fluctuations out in Cook Inlet. As we move out to our main marine forecast, for tomorrow, we have northwesterly flow getting up to as high as 25 knots out in the Gulf, a little bit higher in the inside waters out of the north at 40 knots there to the north of Juneau, and that is expected to die down a little bit as we move into Wednesday, but still remain out of the north predominantly around 20 knots, a little bit weaker as we get closer to Yakutat out of an easterly direction, 10 knots there, with seas getting up to as high as 8 feet, a little bit lower, 4 feet in the inside channels. As we move out over the south central part of the state, primary flow out of a northerly direction, 10 to 15 knots, but a lot of stronger gusts out of bays and passes all throughout Prince William Sound, extending out to the east and out over towards the Seward area as well. We are expecting some freezing spray conditions as we get further off to the east there, and that is going to be true as we move off to the west as well. Northwesterly flow, 25 knots, most locations a little bit stronger to the east of the Barren Islands, 35 knots there. Freezing spray expected all of these areas, including parts of the southern Cook Inlet. But as we get down to the variable 10 knots, not expecting freezing spray with those winds. 13-foot seas is the highest to the east of the Barren Islands once again. Taking us into Wednesday, flow going to switch up quite a bit out of a southeasterly direction, shifting to become more easterly as we get further into the Cook Inlet area, then out of a northerly direction in northern parts of the Cook Inlet area, dropping down to 10 knots there with the strongest Bay near Kodiak Island, 40 knots, and pretty weak flow in the Prince William Sound area out of the east, 15 knots expected there, only 3-foot seas. Taking us into Tuesday for the Alaska Peninsula, we are having some freezing spray conditions with northwest flow 25 knots, primarily along the coastline near the Chignik area. Then in the northern parts of the peninsula, we are expecting some easterly flow, 20 knots there, freezing spray expected as well on Tuesday. That's going to switch up, becoming more southeasterly to easterly, 35 to 40 knots expected on Wednesday in the area, with highest seas on the Pacific side 16 to 17 feet, lower 9 to 11 on the Bering side. Out over the Aleutian Islands, easterly flow 30 knots to the north of Dutch Harbor, getting as high as 50 knots south of Atka. And we are expecting higher seas as we get further to the west, 24 feet from that southern side of Atka all the way out towards Shemya area. And then on Wednesday, flow switching up, becoming more southerly, up to as high as 35 knots as we get to Dutch Harbor area. And then as we get out over the west, northeasterly flow, 45 knots there with 25 to 26-foot seas. Out over the west coast of the state, flow out of a southwesterly direction, becoming more westerly as we get further to the north, 20 knots there, freezing spray conditions expected. Then as we get further to the southeasterly flow, 20 knots, seas around 6 feet on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, easterly flow for most locations, lowest up north 25 knots, getting up to as high as 40 knots as we get further to the south, seas as high as 16 feet near the Pribilofs. Up along the Arctic coast, primary flow out of a westerly direction, highest out near the Barter Island area, 25 knots there, with southeasterly flow to 10 knots as we get closer to the Bering Strait. Switching up, we have northerly flow out west, becoming westerly as we get off towards the Beaufort Sea, and then way down in the south out of that northerly flow, 20 knots, some freezing spray expected there on Wednesday. Quick recap, out over the mainland part of the state, isolated rain and snow showers out over the Aleutian Islands, becoming snow as we get further off to the east. Then we have some isolated snow showers up along the west coast, mixing with fog along the Arctic coastline, blowing snow conditions up there. Blowing snow conditions as well through Thompson Pass with the blizzard warning out. Then a rain-snow mix for the Alaska Panhandle. And with Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.